Between postings, the family always stayed at a lovely old hotel called the Bull. There, along with his cousin Tony, Kieron discovers Jamboree bags and the magic of fishing. Chapter 5. Getting Hooked. Apart from losing Old Bay, heralding the approach of 1959 and gaining Ethel, the last thing I remember from Larkhill was having to leave my chinchilla rabbits behind. We could never keep anything, and I distinctly remember my mother had a chinchilla fur coat. Speculate all you may. Whenever we left a posting, we stayed for a while at a staging post. It was an English town called Woodbridge, where Aunt Marge, my grandmother Ethel's sister, owned the Bull Hotel, an old rickety establishment set centrally on the fork of two roads. The Bull was to emerge as a place etched into all our lives. There, clocks ticked loudly, the floorboards creaked and the smell of polished wood drifted about. Men with pipes leaned on the old bar whilst conducting serious conversations midst clouds of smoke. The kitchen was the domain of Sally, a big lady with a page boy hairdo. There was a manual lift they called a dumb waiter, built into the walls for hoisting meals up to the dining room, where starched, crisp white cloths adorned the tables. Everything was shiny and bright, even Jose the Spanish waiter, who we called Jose B. The beds had big eiderdowns plumped upon them, so I could cuddle up and stare from the windows at the falling snow. I loved the Bull, but had no idea why we were permitted to stay there whenever we wanted. I did eventually find out that families are even more complex than politics, and I later discovered some interesting facts. My grandmother Ethel had at one stage in her life been engaged to the owner of the hotel. Marge, Ethel's younger sister, also frequented the hotel. Rumour has it that one night, while Ethel was away, Marge slipped between the sheets with the owner, gazumping my to-be-wed Nana. It's odd, and stands to reason, therefore, that guilt played a major part in the whole business of our family being allowed to stay whenever we wanted. We being the immediate offspring of Ethel and the man she eventually married, Baynard, my now dead granddad. The old owner died, leaving it all to Marge, who immediately fell in with a snooker player named Alfred, a man with balls, lucky Marge. They lived together in some kind of clandestine arrangement. I do know they weren't married and that she, according to Betty, was a thief because nothing came to our family. But I maintain we wouldn't have enjoyed those glorious stays if she hadn't pipped old Grandma at the post. Plus, I was rapidly becoming a pain in the backside, a sage of sorts with philosophical notions about personal possessions not being important. We couldn't keep anything anyway. I loved Christmas at the Bull Hotel. Chestnuts, blazing fires, the smell of pine trees, laughter, presents stuffed into sacks at the foot of the bed and Jamboree bags crammed with sweets. Tony, Marge's daughter's son, and therefore my cousin, was always at the Bull. He became my friend. Then there was Nasser, son of Wendy the waitress. God knows what Nasser's real name was. He walked with a spring in his step, so we also called him Springfoot. He taught me 3 games: Knock Down Ginger, where we knocked on doors and ran away laughing, making plasticine animals and throwing darts at them in the snooker room, and finally, the art of using a catapult. They were great for smashing windows, but using steel ball bearings to knock off a chirping robin redbreast at 50 paces was one game I detested. After Nasser had shot one, I'd be brave and laugh and try to be big, but I made a point of remembering the spot where it happened so that I could go back to bury them when no one was about. I hated the way those missiles smashed into their little chests and their wings folded so they could no longer fly. When you picked them up, they were still warm, their little heads lolling. I couldn't see the point of it, but it was fishing that really grabbed me. One day, charged with anticipation, I toyed with a hand line as I sat shivering, Wellington boot-clad legs dangling beside Tony on the end of a wooden pier near the mouth of the river in Woodbridge. An icy wind turned our cheeks red and low clouds scudded past like packs of hunting dogs. Already Tony had 3 slimy sea eels curled up in the bucket. I had none. I was bored. "Go and get us a Jamboree bag," Tony suggested. I was up and away. Nowadays you can't get Jamboree bags like there used to be. There were a whole lot of mixed sweets inside and a little surprise toy. I liked opening the bag and taking in the smell. Sweets. I would do anything for them. Tony watched me go, and as soon as I was out of sight, he pulled in my line, grabbed one of the eels from the bucket, stuck the hook into its mouth and wrapped the line around it for good measure. He then chucked it back into the chill water. I returned and we tucked into the sweets. When the last flying saucer, with its rice paper melting to release the sherbet, was swallowed, Tony cried out urgently, "Quick! You got a bite!" I pulled, and there it was, my first eel. I frowned as I saw the murdered creature lying there without so much as a squirm, but threw it into the bucket all the same. I was hooked. My passion for angling set, and now, all these years later, I know why that is. Fishing is a real escape from reality. A way, as I saw it, of meditating and shutting out the world, because in England the chance of catching a fish was usually a long shot, so your mind focused on that while you froze your bollocks off. Of course, I knew what Tony had done. I could count. Small as the gesture was, when I think of that day, it was quite something for him to do such a thing. It set me up with an addiction that has never abated. It's funny how I didn't mind killing a fish but would avoid even standing on an ant if I could. So hooked was I that any opportunity to drop a line was seized. One day, Jose the waiter sent me off to catch a fish for lunch. He was, no doubt, just trying to get rid of me. I was a pest, always asking questions, always asking if I could help, following him around, telling him useless things, like how many eggs you must leave in a bird's nest so the mother doesn't notice. I would tell him birds can only count to 3, and that infinity is forever. That winter's day he sent me packing with my fishing rod, and it was one of many times I didn't catch a thing. It was freezing cold, and eventually, like a sorry tramp, I traipsed up the hill past Woolworth's. I noticed a fishmonger next door and gaped at the neat array on display. I was really upset that I didn't have a fish for Jose. Always wanting to please was an annoying trait I had. I wandered into the shop, just for a look. Before long, the last of my pocket money went across the counter in exchange for the best-looking fish on display. Like a surgeon with blood splattered over his apron, the man wrapped it up in newspaper. I scurried out of the shop. Before I reached the bull, I slipped into the church grounds opposite, found a bench and unwrapped my purchase. Carefully, I stuck a hook in the fish's mouth, waltzed into the back entrance of the bull, and stood in the doorway of the kitchen, where Jose was sucking on a cigarette. 3 things gave the game away. The fish was half frozen. It had been expertly gutted, and it was a tropical red emperor. It must have taken all of Jose's diplomacy to compliment me and gracefully accept the catch of the day. So the Woodbridge days came and went as we traversed the world. Ted rocketed up the senior ranks of the Royal Artillery. We were to head across the British Channel back to Germany to rendezvous with him. Ted was now a major. With Grandma Ethel in tow, we crossed the English Channel bound for the German ranges, where we boys would get to pull the trigger of a 25-pounder cannon, drink army tea you could stand a teaspoon in and watch, mesmerized, as Ted launched the Honest John ground-to-ground missile, the ground shaking our boots off. I was in love with life and all it could promise.